Once upon a time, in the shadow of a great granite outcrop that rose from the earth like a titan's fist, lay the village of Abule-Alumo. Here, in the heartland of Abeokuta, red dust and stubborn traditions clung to everything. The village was a place of deep-rooted customs and whispered beliefs, a community where the lines between fortune and divine favor, misfortune and a curse, were drawn with an unwavering hand. On the very edge of this village, where the cultivated land gave way to thorny scrub, stood a crumbling mud hut that seemed to be shrinking into the earth from which it was made. This was the home of the Adebayo family. They were a family living on the fringes of existence, their lives a daily battle against the encroaching despair that the barren land offered. Adebayo, the father, was a man whose strength had been leached from him by the unforgiving sun. Each morning, he would stand at the edge of his tiny yam plot, a patch of land so dry and cracked it looked like the palm of a giant mummy. He would stare, his eyes hollowed by a grief too deep for tears, at the soil that refused to yield. He was a farmer whose hands had forgotten the feel of a heavy, ripe yam, a man whose ancestral lands had turned against him. The whispers in the village said his grandfather had offended the earth goddess, and now the land itself had sealed its womb to his lineage. His wife, Funk, moved through her days with a quiet, heartbreaking grace. Her beauty, once the talk of Abule-Alumo, had faded like a beloved cloth left too long in the sun. Her skin was a roadmap of their hardships, etched with worry. Every dawn, she performed a ritual of defiance, sweeping away the fine red dust that settled on their doorstep during the night, as if by clearing this small patch of ground she could hold back the tide of misery that threatened to engulf them. Her gaze would often find her husband, a silent acknowledgment of the shared burden that bowed his shoulders and stole the light from his eyes. The people of Abule-Alumo had passed their judgment on the Adebayos long ago. They were cursed, an affliction to be avoided at all costs. Mothers would pull their adult children close, shielding their eyes as they scurried past the Adebayo compound, their lips moving in silent prayers to ward off the family's ill luck. The young, virile men of the village, their muscles slick with sweat as they worked their own fertile plots, would cast looks of derision at Adebayo's threadbare buba, their laughter a cruel echo in the hot, still air. Even Baba Odin, the village elder, a man whose face was a mask of wrinkled wisdom and who served as the keeper of their most sacred traditions, would pointedly ignore Adebayo during council gatherings. He would share his kola nut and pass his gourd of palm wine to every man but him, the exclusion of public branding, a confirmation of Adebayo's status as an outcast. The sounds of the village were a constant torment. When the festival drums began their hypnotic, throbbing rhythm, calling the community to celebrate a birth or a wedding, the Adebayos became prisoners in their own home. From their crumbling hut, they would watch the distant flicker of torchlight illuminate figures dancing with an abandon they could only dream of. The air would carry the tantalizing aroma of roasted goat and spicy jollof rice, a feast they were never invited to share. Their eldest daughter, Ayanu, a woman on the cusp of 30, was an invisible presence. Suitors avoided her family, convinced that a union with her would bring nothing but misfortune. Inside the hut, the silence was a heavy blanket woven with grief. Funk would turn her face away to hide the tears that welled each time a gust of wind made their loose door rattle, a mournful sound that seemed to count their losses. Adebayo's voice, once a rich and resonant baritone, would crack whenever he tried to recount stories of their ancestors, the words catching in his throat like a fishbone. Their son, Kola, a man in his early 20s, had learned from a young age to swallow his hunger, to silence the rumbling in his stomach, to spare his parents the agony of seeing his lean frame tremble. He was a silent observer, his young mind trying to make sense of a world that had turned its back on his family. He saw the shame in his father's eyes, the sorrow in his mother's, and the fear in the eyes of the other villagers. And deep within his heart, a quiet determination began to grow, a tiny seed of hope in a barren landscape. One blistering afternoon, when the sun was at its zenith and the village was in the grip of a drowsy siesta, Kola crept behind the village school. The headmaster, a man known for his prodigious appetite and his equally prodigious waist, was Kola's last hope. His stomach, a tight knot of hunger, rumbled in anticipation as he began to rifle through discarded papers and broken slate pencils. He was about to give up, his heart heavy with disappointment, when a glint of color in the dust caught his eye. There, stuck beneath a tattered old exercise book, lay a crumpled slip of paper. It was a lottery ticket, a splash of vibrant color against the monochrome poverty of his world. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of hope and fear. With trembling fingers, he smoothed out the edges of the ticket. It was for the 100 naira jackpot, the biggest prize the village had ever seen, a sum of money that could change their lives forever. He closed his fist around the ticket, the crumpled paper feeling as weighty as a bar of gold. And then he ran, his bare feet kicking up tiny clouds of red dust with every leap, his heart soaring with a hope that was as bright and as brilliant as the midday sun. That evening, a hush fell over Beulah Lumo. The usual cacophony of evening sounds, the laughter of families, the chatter of women, the rhythmic pounding of yams, was replaced by an expectant silence. Every family was gathered around their crackling radios, the air thick with anticipation. The voice of the announcer, a disembodied presence that held the power to change destinies, crackled through the airwaves, naming the winning number. Inside the Adebayo hut, the silence was so profound it was almost a physical presence. Kola held the crumpled ticket in his hand, his eyes fixed on the radio as if willing it to speak the numbers he so desperately wanted to hear. And then it came, a string of digits that matched the ones on his ticket, each number a hammer blow against the wall of their despair. A single tear rolled down Kola's cheek. His parents, their faces a mask of disbelief, stared at the ticket, then at their son, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning joy. And then they embraced him, a fierce, desperate hug that threatened to crush the air from his lungs, the creaking mud hut seeming to sigh in relief around them. The news of the Adebayo's win spread through the village like a wildfire, fanned by the winds of gossip and disbelief. The 100 naira jackpot, a sum that had seemed impossibly large, had been claimed by the cursed family, the family that had been shunned and ostracized for as long as anyone could remember. With their newfound fortune, the Adebayos bought seeds, not just any seeds, but the finest, most promising yam seeds from the market in the next town. They bought new tools, their sharp, gleaming edges a stark contrast to the worn-out, rusted implements they had used for so long. And as the first rains of the season began to fall, they tilled the field, their movements filled with a renewed sense of purpose and hope. The villagers watched from a distance, their faces a mixture of curiosity and envy. They saw the green shoots pierce the red earth, a vibrant testament to the Adebayo's hard work and the life-giving power of the rain. And as the weeks turned into months, they watched in awe as the family's harvest overflowed, the yams fat and heavy, the chickens plump and healthy. In time, when the harvest was in and the barns were full, the Adebayos hosted a feast. They strung lanterns from the branches of the acacia trees, their soft, warm glow a beacon of hope in the darkness. They cooked pot after pot of jollof rice, its spicy aroma mingling with the smell of freshly roasted yams. They filled clay bowls with food and offered them to all who came, their generosity a stark contrast to the years of rejection they had endured. And come they did. The villagers, their heads bowed in shame, their hearts heavy with remorse, gathered in the Adebayo compound. They brought gifts of palm wine and kola nuts, their offerings a silent apology for their past cruelty. They draped colorful fabrics over the shoulders of Adebayo and Funk, a gesture of respect and a symbol of their renewed acceptance into the community. Even Barber Odin, his face etched with regret, came to pay his respects, his presence a public admission of his past misjudgment. Laughter, a sound that had been absent from the Adebayo's home for so long, now rose into the night air, weaving new bonds of friendship and community where the bitter threads of curses had once ruled. The villagers, humbled and grateful, danced with the Adebayos under the starlit sky, their spirits finally free. And so, the Adebayos taught their village a simple truth, that hope can sprout from the most forgotten corners, and that blessings sometimes hide in the dustiest of places, waiting for a heart brave enough to claim them. The hamlet, once shrouded in sorrow, now danced beneath the stars, never again to mistake poverty for a curse. If this story captivated you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Folktales Blockbuster, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next story from the heart of the hustle. Stay safe out there.